Portman joins us right now to talk more about this. And Senator Portman, it's great to see you this morning.
Hey, Becky, thanks for having me on again.
This is an idea you first brought up with us, at least. I think it was about a month ago, although it's hard to tell how much time has passed over that. But your thought at that point was that people on the front lines who were going back to work should have an incentive to actually do that, to get back in. What kind of progress have you made on that front since?
Well, for the last 6 weeks, really, we've been talking about doing it now as part of the $600. But as I talked to you today, you know, the July 31st date is looming, and that's when the $600 ends. Democrats are insisting that there be $600 not just for the next month or so, but into next year. Republicans, for the most part, are insisting that the $600 end. I think there's a good way to deal with this, which is to say, let's have a lesser amount as a federal supplement to the state unemployment insurance, but then let's provide this bonus. I think we should have it right now. That doesn't seem to be happening because it's already a disincentive to work, the $600. But it creates an additional disincentive as the economy begins to reopen even further and there's more and more demand for labor. So let's allow people to take some of that money back to work with them. It helps them to get back to work, back to their health care, and most people get their health care. To their retirement. If they have a 401k, they likely have retirement at work, and back to training and back to the dignity of work. And for small businesses, you know, they're desperate to get people. I hear this across the state of Ohio. You guys hear it from across the country. But it's harder to get people back. It also happens to save the taxpayers a lot of money, both the state level, because fewer people on unemployment insurance at the state level, but also this federal supplement would be less than the $600. So I think it's a good idea, and I think it's encouraging work, which everybody should want to do.
What kind of level are we talking? I think when we spoke with you last, you were thinking $400 to go back to work, $400 a week?
Well, $450 out of the $600 is what we came up with, really as a way to make people equal to someone who's on minimum wage. In other words, there wouldn't be a disadvantage for someone coming off UI if they were at a minimum wage job. That's an average. That's how the $450 was arrived at, and it was a 6-week program. Again, I support that right now. I wish Congress would pass it. The House is not in session. I can't see it happening immediately. But I do think that when we hit this July 31st date, which again is a cliff, you know, we go from 600 to nothing. The Democrats are going to insist on 600 going again into next year and some well into next year. And Republicans saying we shouldn't continue because it's a disincentive, which it is. And the University of Chicago American Action Forum study you talked about shows that. In fact, for the bottom 20% of wage earners, they're making twice as much on average under unemployment insurance as they would going back to work. So I think we need to come up with something creative, and that would be a lower federal supplement during a period of time, I think between now and the end of the year, and then a return to work bonus. And that'll help get people back to work, which everybody should be for.
Senator, what do we do with those folks who really can't go back to work, either because of their age, or because they have comorbidities or other issues that make it unsafe for them to go back to work?
Well, this is a voluntary program, Andrew. So anybody wants to stay on UI at whatever the level is, they certainly can. Most states, as you know, have somewhere between 35 and 60% wage replacement in their unemployment insurance program, and that's the ultimate safety net. That continues no matter what. And the question is, what kind of federal supplement should there be beyond that? And then the program, the Return to Work bonus, is, of course, a voluntary program. I think a lot of people would take us up on it because people want to go back to work. But that disincentive is huge. And it's also hard for employers to ask people to come back to work when you have that kind of a gap. Because, as you know, under the UI system, you're supposed to be searching for work. And supposedly, if you have an employer asking you to come back, you're supposed to leave UI and go back to work. Right now, the UI systems are kind of overwhelmed. It's hard for them to administer that. But it's also hard for employers to ask for that when you've got this kind of disparity.
Senator, it seems like your plan is a pretty common sense, down the middle sort of plan. Is it really breaking down on party lines as to who will sign up for this and who won't?
I don't think so. I mean, I've talked to a number of Democrats about it. 4 or 5 of them were interested in working with me at one point, and then I think they were told by their leadership, our plan is 600. That's our negotiating position going into this. Let's stick with that publicly. But if you talk to them, as I'm sure you have, they will tell you they're hearing the same thing I'm hearing. I mean, if you have to make, in a state like Ohio, $54,000 a year in order to make it worth leaving unemployment, you know, it's a disincentive. There's no question about it. And for small businesses, this is a real problem. So they're hearing that too. Most Democrats realize that. And the question is, how can we work out something to deal with this July 31st deadline? And I think the return to work bonus is a good way to do that.
One of the other issues we've been following so closely is the tensions that seem to be rising up again between the United States and China. We've heard about a lot of different things, and then there was an accusation that we heard earlier today that the former chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, is making against Huawei, saying that they do indeed feed much of the information back to the Chinese government. There have been concerns about competition, and I understand that you are introducing a bill this week to try and protect some American innovation from Chinese theft. What's the bill? How's it work?
Becky, we spent a couple years working on this one issue of how to avoid China coming here to the United States and taking some of our best research back to China. And this is military research, it's healthcare research, it's economic technology. So it has helped to help the Chinese economy and the military over the last couple of decades, actually. They do this primarily through the talent programs, particularly the 1,000 Talents Plan, which we studied, issued a report, and also have had hearings on this and now have caught legislation that we're introducing today. It's bipartisan legislation. It's based on a report that was thorough and fact-driven, but also shocking to find out that China purposely and systematically comes over here, targets American researchers who are doing promising research, pays them to be able to set up replicate labs in China to do that work. And we've just sort of allowed it to happen for the last 20 years. The FBI testified at one of our hearings that basically they've been asleep at the wheel until now, and they're going to make up for it, and they have started to make up for it. To their credit, there have been about a half dozen public arrests just in the last few months on this. We just had 54 researchers either be fired or choose to leave the National Institutes of Health because of a conflict of commitment or a conflict of interest. In other words, taking money from China or other countries, mostly China, and also working on NIH projects. You know, you're not supposed to do that. And yet there's no law against it. And so our legislation, among other things, puts a law in place there. It also deals with the theft of intellectual property and innovation at our research universities and our other institutes of research by saying anybody has access to sensitive information that has to be reported. It also helps the State Department to keep people out who they know are coming here to steal our research. So there's 4 or 5 provisions that are very important that are bipartisan, again, based on a thorough study that we need to put in place. One of the points I've made before to you, Becky, is this is about us. You know, this is what we can do here within our control in this country to better protect ourselves. So there's a lot of criticism of China and a lot of finger pointing at China. But we got to get our own house in order here, and that's what this legislation does.
Senator, related question on China. As you know, there's this book by John Bolton that's going around. Specifically in it, he talks about the president's role and ZTE. Specifically, effectively alleges that it was the way we treated ZTE was misused as part of a bargaining chip with his relationship with President Xi. Effectively said that this should have been investigated. Do you think it should be?
Well, the Bolton stuff is interesting. I've known John quite a while. I have considered him a friend. Andrew, I also worked at 2 White Houses, and you know, if I felt that way about either of my 2 bosses, Bush 41 or 43, you know, I would have resigned, and that's the appropriate thing to do. So I don't know if what he says is true or not. I do know that, you know, in my day, and maybe this is old school, but you know, what happens in the Oval Office and conversations with the president is meant to remain confidential, to allow, you know, those conversations to be open and candid. So I have concerns about, you know, the way in which this is unfolding. In terms of policy, I do agree that China telecom companies are a big problem. We just issued a report on that as well out of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. And what we found was that of the 3 Chinese telecom companies that have not been addressed by the FCC or the Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security, you know, again, we have been naive. We have allowed them to operate in this country and collect data, much of which we believe goes back to China. And that's something we need to crack down on, and we're finally starting to do it. So in terms of ZTE and in terms of telecom generally, I do think there's more we have to do. Again, I think we have not protected ourselves in this country, and we need to realize that in this century, you know, this is happening. It's not just China, it's North Korea, it's Iran, it's anybody else who can get access to this information. But China is the main perpetrator of this, and we need to protect ourselves better.
Senator Portman, thanks for joining us today. We hope to have you back again soon.
Thanks, Becky. Always good to be on with you. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.